The air shimmered with heat over the open savanna, each ripple of sun-baked grass seeming to blur the edges of the world. Among the waving stalks, a motionless figure drew the careful attention of the observers, their eyes narrowing against the brilliance as they took in the stillness. A lion, solitary and immense, lay sprawled beneath the unforgiving sun, his tawny coat dulled by dust and sweat. At first glance, the quiet expanse around him seemed indifferent, yet the faint, shallow rise and fall of his chest betrayed the fragile presence of life, a whisper beneath the roar of the day. The observers adjusted their pace, moving slowly, deliberately, so as not to disturb the delicate rhythm of survival playing out before them. Each careful step through the dry grass felt weighted, a recognition that this was a moment that might tilt toward either end. The lion's body sagged in exhaustion, muscles trembling under the strain of unseen injuries, the remnants of a struggle that left his pride's absence felt in every careful movement he could manage. His eyes fluttered, amber pools half closed against the sunlight, weary and heavy with fatigue. Small, stuttering breaths escaped him, each one uneven, a testimony to the toll exacted by hunger, heat, and pain. A faint twitch of an ear, a slow shift of a paw, suggested a spark of resistance beneath the apparent surrender. The observers remained close but silent, their presence a quiet anchor, letting the natural rhythms of the animal guide the interaction. The grass rustled faintly, a subtle accompaniment to the shallow exhalations that punctuated the weighty stillness. Around him, a few antelopes grazed warily, casting nervous glances, while distant birds spiraled lazily, the mundane continuity of the ecosystem continuing above the fragile scene below. One observer knelt carefully, maintaining a respectful distance, noting the dried streaks of blood along the flanks, the ragged breath that threatened to falter at any moment. "It's okay, boy," she murmured softly, a sound swallowed by the heat, more a grounding gesture than an attempt to rouse him. The lion's head twitched toward her, the faintest acknowledgement, a subtle trust extended in the smallest gesture. Time seemed to slow around them, measured in shallow breaths, occasional twitches, and the deliberate, attentive patience of those who understood the delicate balance between intervention and respect. Dust clung to the edges of his mane, wings of flies hovered cautiously, aware of vulnerability in the stillness. Minutes stretched as though they were hours, each heartbeat marked by gentle observation and a hope that persistence would meet survival. The lion's eyes blinked open more fully for a brief moment, catching the sun in a way that made them almost luminous, a sign of resilience faint but undeniable. His chest rose and fell more steadily, the signs of life subtle yet resolute, suggesting that this fragile body, weighed down by pain and weariness, might yet endure. A breeze stirred the grass around him, the world moving in quiet acknowledgement of the fragile equilibrium. In that suspended moment, life hung delicately, the vastness of the savanna bearing silent witness to one creature's tenuous hold on the day, a silent testament to endurance whispered in the heat and light. The lion's shallow breaths created a soft, uneven rhythm, barely stirring the dust around him, and the observers waited, attuned to each subtle flicker of muscle, each hesitant blink. One man stepped forward, deliberate and measured, letting the heat and the wide, silent space guide his movements rather than any impulse or haste. Every motion was slow, each step a negotiation with the fragile balance of life before him. His eyes tracked the tiny shifts of the lion's head, the faint trembling of paws, the subtle flexing of shoulders as though the animal itself was weighing whether to surrender or resist. He paused several paces away, leaning slightly forward but never forcing proximity, his presence steady yet unobtrusive. Even in pain, the lion's eyes held a flicker of awareness, amber orbs reflecting both fear and an instinctive calculation of the stranger in his territory. The man crouched low, lowering his center of gravity to appear less threatening, his hands relaxed at his sides. He noted the slight quiver of the lion's tail, the ears twitching backward, and the almost imperceptible shivering of the jaw as the animal exhaled. These were not signs of aggression but a map of tension, exhaustion, and guarded curiosity. A faint groan issued from the lion's throat, low and resonant, a sound of discomfort mixed with wariness. The man let his voice emerge softly, almost a breath against the wind. "You're almost there," a whispered threat of reassurance rather than a command. The lion's head tilted slightly, the muscles of his neck easing just enough to suggest he registered the tone, acknowledging the presence without surrendering his autonomy. The savanna around them held its own quiet vigilance. Grasses stirred lazily, birds circled high and distant, and the faint rustle of insects seemed magnified in the silence. Dust clung to the lion's coat, and small flies hovered around the raw edges of his wounds, yet he remained still enough to indicate a cautious trust forming, fragile as it was. Each flick of his ear or lift of a paw was a tentative negotiation, a small act of communication in a language older than words. The man mirrored patience with patience, eyes soft, movements carefully attuned to the lion's signals, every gesture chosen to minimize alarm while conveying steadiness. Slowly, imperceptibly, the lion shifted his weight, his forelegs extending slightly, tail brushing against dry earth in a gesture that suggested faint acceptance of the human presence. He pressed his side to the warmth of the soil, a subtle grounding that allowed him to tolerate intrusion without panic. The man's shoulders relaxed, though his attention remained fixed, reading each flicker and sigh, every micro-expression that spoke of pain, vigilance, or emerging trust. It was a dialogue without words, composed entirely of motion, breath, and eye contact, a delicate negotiation of safety and patience. Time stretched thin, measured in the quiet cadence of hesitant gestures. With each passing moment, the distance between fear and tentative trust narrowed, not through force or urgency, but through the deliberate rhythm of care. The lion's low groans softened, muscles uncoiling slightly, and for the first time, the observer sensed the faintest emergence of hope. In the arid light, two beings, the injured predator and the careful human, moved together within a fragile understanding, one that could grow slowly into reliance, in the quiet pulse of the savanna's heat. The lion's body tensed, a subtle coil of instinct and instinctive caution, as the man moved slightly closer, extending a hand not toward command but toward support. Every motion was measured, deliberate, a language of patience rather than urgency. The predator's amber eyes tracked the approach, flicking between suspicion and the barest glimmer of curiosity, muscles tightening with the weight of every decision that had been shaped by years of survival. The air seemed suspended, heavy with heat and expectation, as if the savanna itself had quieted to witness this fragile negotiation. The man's voice remained soft, barely more than a whisper, a grounding thread amidst the stillness. "It's okay, girl," he said gently, the words offered like a bridge rather than an instruction. The lion's head twitched, the faintest acknowledgement, a tiny concession that life and instinct were meeting in cautious alignment. The initial contact was tentative. A paw shifted, dragging slightly through the dry soil, nostrils flaring against the scent of human presence, yet not retreating entirely. The man lowered his hand slowly, brushing it along the lion's flank in a motion meant to comfort rather than restrain. The lion flinched at the first touch, a ripple of tension running through his frame but did not move away. Small, low rumbling sounds emanated from deep in his chest, half growl, half sigh, an ambiguous language of pain, confusion, and faint acknowledgement. The observer noted the subtle changes. A paw extended slightly, a tail curling a little closer, a head lowering fractionally to meet the gesture. Each micro-movement became a wordless reply, a dialogue conducted in the language of presence, touch, and patience. Around them, the landscape remained quiet, a suspended canvas of heat and light. The grass swayed in long, wavering lines, catching shadows that flickered across the lion's tawny coat, highlighting both its beauty and its weariness. Insects hummed softly in the background, distant birds cast slow circles overhead, and the horizon shimmered with the heat of the afternoon. Every detail of the environment seemed heightened, as if the savanna itself were aware of the delicate trust forming. The ground, the wind, even the distant call of a lone baboon, all contributed to a hush that allowed the fragile connection to deepen without interference. The man's patience proved its quiet power. The lion's initial flinches softened, his chest rising and falling with slightly steadier breaths. His movements became small, tentative gestures of consent, a gentle shift closer, a paw resting lightly on the soil as though testing the safety of proximity. The man mirrored these gestures with slow, deliberate movements, maintaining an unbroken rhythm of respect and care. Each moment seemed to stretch and fold upon itself, a fragile choreography in which fear and need balanced against one another, yielding glimpses of trust that could grow if nurtured with continued calm and attentiveness. In the warm, still light, the bond was small but undeniable. Two lives, one shaped by instinct, the other by deliberate patience, moved closer in a quiet, wordless harmony. The lion's rumbling breaths began to carry a gentler cadence, and his eyes, once tight with tension, softened fractionally as if acknowledging the possibility of care. The savanna waited with them, holding its breath, bearing silent witness to the first true moments of connection, fragile yet unwavering in its quiet intensity. A faint rustle carried across the sun-baked plains, almost imperceptible against the whisper of dry grasses, yet it stirred something deep within the injured lion. His amber eyes flicked toward the horizon, pupils narrowing, ears rotating with sudden, instinctive alertness. The air seemed to thrum with tension as shapes emerged, low and deliberate, moving through the wavering heat haze. A pride, familiar in presence and tone, appeared in the distance. Tawny forms stepping carefully, their movements slow but purposeful, eyes fixed on the solitary figure in the dust. The lion's chest, once shallow and labored, rose with slightly more determination, muscles coiling as strength gathered in response to the distant calls, soft murmurs that carried across the savanna. The observers remained still, sensing the significance of the moment, knowing that what unfolded now was beyond human intervention. The bond between predator and pride, forged by years of shared survival, asserted itself quietly yet irrevocably. The injured lion struggled to his paws, each movement hesitant at first, limbs trembling with lingering weakness. Low, guttural sounds escaped him, a mixture of exertion and recognition, as he lifted his head and scanned the approaching family. His tail flicked with nervous anticipation, brushing dry stalks of grass, while the small, rhythmic tremor in his shoulders betrayed both pain and excitement. The observers noticed how his eyes, once clouded with exhaustion and distrust, now glimmered with a faint vitality, the spark of instinct reawakening. The pride moved closer, encircling with protective intent, their eyes and ears attuned to every twitch of the injured male. The subtle language of growls, nudges, and brief brushes of fur communicated what words could not: recognition, reassurance, and the gentle enforcement of belonging. Step by careful step, the lion advanced toward them, legs quivering but well undeterred. Each cautious movement was mirrored by the pride's calm, measured approach, a choreography of reunion written in muscle, posture, and breath. He paused momentarily, head low, chest heaving as if testing the strength of his own resolve. One of the pride members edged closer, brushing aside with his shoulder in a silent welcome, and the injured lion responded with a tentative nuzzle, a fragile yet profound acknowledgement. The observers watched quietly, understanding that this was the culmination of days spent in uncertainty, the payoff of patience, presence, and gentle care. The savanna seemed to soften around them, the harsh light mellowed by the subtle shift in energy. Dust rose gently as the lion moved fully into the circle of his family, his breathing becoming steadier, the tremor in his legs less pronounced. The distant call of a bird, the sway of golden grass, and the faint shimmer of heat over the plains framed the reunion in a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere. Low rumbles traveled through the group, vibrating in harmony, a language older than time, affirming belonging, safety, and connection. In those moments, the world contracted around the injured lion and his pride, a powerful tableau of survival and reunion that demanded neither fanfare nor dramatization, yet carried every ounce of emotional weight. As the sun began its descent, painting the horizon in muted golds and soft ochres, the observers stepped back, giving space for the family to settle. The lion, once weak and motionless beneath the relentless heat, now stood among his own, muscles gradually regaining tension, head lifted, eyes alert yet calm. The savanna breathed with them, and for a brief, luminous moment, the fragile intersection of patience, trust, and instinct created a quiet triumph that needed no words to be understood. The injured lion, now steadier on his legs, shifted with cautious confidence, each movement a careful negotiation between lingering fatigue and the instinctual strength that had defined him for years. The warmth of the late afternoon sun brushed his mane, highlighting the subtle sheen of recovering vitality, and he lifted his head, amber eyes scanning the familiar forms of his pride. Muscles coiled and released with deliberate grace, no longer trembling from weakness, as he moved toward them in measured steps. The family responded in kind, nudges and low rumbles greeting his approach, a silent chorus of acceptance that required no dramatization. Dust rose beneath paws, catching the fading sunlight and painting fleeting patterns across the savanna floor, a quiet celebration of resilience and reunion. The man remained at a respectful distance, watching the delicate choreography unfold, a quiet participant in a scene that required nothing from him but patience. His presence, steady and unobtrusive, had bridged the fragile space between fear and trust, yet now it was time to let nature reclaim its rhythm. He shifted slightly, kneeling once, then straightening, allowing the lion's instincts to guide the next moments. There was no urgency in his movements, only an awareness that the balance of care and distance had shaped the outcome, a trust that had been earned and would now extend beyond human hands. The lion paused for a brief instant, head turning toward the man, eyes meeting his with a subtle acknowledgement, a fleeting connection that carried the weight of shared patience and understanding. The surrounding landscape seemed to exhale in the same gentle rhythm. Grasses swayed in a languid breeze, the air golden and thick with the heat of the departing day, while distant acacia trees cast long wavering shadows across the earth. Birds circled lazily overhead, the occasional call piercing the soft hum of evening insects. The lion's strides became smoother, more assured, each paw-fall deliberate yet unhurried, signaling the full reclamation of autonomy. Small, subtle gestures, the brushing of heads, a low rumble from the pride, the flick of a tail, wove a quiet narrative of safety, kinship, and restored strength. The man remained still, observing, his breathing slow and even, as if to harmonize with the natural tempo of the scene. Time seemed to slow, measured not by minutes but by the faint cadence of life returning to its proper place. The lion moved fully into the embrace of his family, shoulder brushing shoulder, heads lowering and rising in synchrony. There was no fanfare, no outward display of triumph, only the understated, profound truth of survival and trust. The observers felt the weight of this quiet victory, the significance held not in spectacle but in the subtle exchange of gestures and the restoration of a rhythm disrupted by injury and circumstance. As dusk settled over the savanna, the horizon deepening into muted golds and soft purples, the man stepped back further, merging with the edge of the landscape. The wind whispered through tall grasses, carrying the faint memory of contact, patience, and shared vulnerability. The lion and his pride moved slowly, confidently into the distance, shapes melding with shadow and light, leaving behind a soft echo of trust that lingered in the warm evening air. The savanna held its breath one last time, watching as life resumed its quiet flow, the fragile intersection of care and instinct now a memory woven into the rhythm of the land, gentle and enduring.